So our process for getting the beds prepared, that's actually, we've used a couple different ways, but the general thing is we've had a dozer or else a loader come in here and make these pads for us. You could get by with, if you have a pretty level ground, just starting off with that and tarping that and killing off your grass, and then maybe bringing in some topsoil or something to help level that out and just to get it a little bit off the ground so you got some watershed, because all that, you're going to get a lot of rain, a lot of watershed coming off of the structure from all the rain. So, but what we did is this time we had a dozer in here, and it was a D6, so it's a really big piece of machinery, and they didn't do a great job at it, but adequate enough for us to be able to go through this. And so they came in here, and after they removed the trees, we brought in some topsoil for them to level out. We just gave them some guidance. We said, here we put some flags down where we estimated the structure to be. And that's what they used just to kind of eye it out. And then again, they took the topsoil just to go back and level set that. And after that, then we watered it down so it would kind of compact, and you could kind of then see where you're going to have pockets and where the level is going to be. It'll help you, it'll just help compact that, and you'll be able to see a little more visually where you're at. These line levels are really good for that. Even if you were to take that and do how it's set here, but you can use that. In fact, I've even gone sideways throughout it periodically and run the string lines in an X fashion, and even throughout horizontally or the width wise, and that will allow you to see some pockets if you put that string line real down low, if you're really anal about it. And I was my first time. I would not do that now, but I was extremely worried the first time I was putting one of these up, and so I was taking measurements and seeing where my level was throughout the entire course of the project. So, but yeah, I definitely won't worry about the squaring up. It's not that intimidating. You're going to have a lot more concerns once you get in the greenhouse and growing stuff, and your challenge will move from cornering and squaring up a greenhouse to how to actually grow and how to fight off bugs and how to sell your produce. So,
hey folks, it's Nick. I'm going to interrupt Carl real quick to give you a couple of points to think about. Number one, when he's talking about using a string line to kind of keep everything level within his pad, this is an illustration that shows, hey, on the pad where you're going to put your ground post, go ahead and run a couple of stakes, and then you can put a string line or a string level up and kind of see where your high and your low spots are. Your soil is always kind of going to be changing and moving around, but if you want it completely flat, this is just a good tool to show you where to kind of grade out with a rake or a hoe or a shovel, and then how to use some of that fill to fill in the holes. You'll notice on the left to the right of the stakes, he is also talking about water diversion. You can put a couple of scallops or a couple of trenches in that's going to flow downwards and away from your tunnel. And this is something that if you are going to do an NRCS grant, that your agent will help you work through. And so in this picture, you can see to the left and to the right, the scallops, it's a little hard to see in this picture, and that's why we did the illustration, but he does have these water diversions away from the tunnels. So as water hits the top and rolls down, that instead of pooling up inside of the tunnel, it's going to run away. Another thing I want you to think about is when we first started visiting Carl, most of his land was covered up like the tree line that you see in the top left. And as he's made his pads and has increased his farm, which you can see in front of that tree line, moving over to the right top panel, all of those limbs and trees and bushes and vines and whatever else happened to be laying on the floor of that forest back there had to go somewhere. And so he's going to put it in a pile. It's going to decompose, or he may burn it later on. I don't think we've quite gotten that far yet. But just think of all the stuff that's on top of the land. The bottom left picture is going to illustrate that there's still a lot of stuff underneath. So rocks, roots, stump, anything that's been buried for a long time, which as you're putting in your ground post does have the ability to impede the post. So what do? Well, if you think about a tractor or an excavator going in the middle of a forest and clearing the trees to make your pad, just remember this is a good illustration to think about all of the stuff that's underneath once everything has been pushed over. So in this slide, if we assume that we have a perfectly level pad, which is honestly pretty difficult to achieve for most people, here's some things to think about. If you have a 20-foot high tunnel or a 40-foot high tunnel, I wouldn't want you to do this more than like 2 or 3 times. If you are putting in your ground post and you hit a rock or a stump or a root, and you just can't get that ground post in, 2 foot in, 2 foot out, and you got 3 or 4 inches hanging up the top, I'm really okay with you cutting off the top part of that ground post to keep it level with the string line and the rest of the post. Because remember, the top of the ground post being level is the most important thing. Now you are going to have to drill a new hole for your hoop to put a bolt through there, but that really isn't as hard as going down and digging up the root. Now on a ground post, as you see here on the right, you may have to go ahead and listen, folks, we're farming. This is hard work. And sometimes, things aren't easy on the farm. So if you have a ground post that needs to go in this spot and there's something down there, you're going to have to bust out the shovel, maybe an axe, maybe a pry bar, something like that to get yourself as much depth as possible. Now, if you're having to do a whole bunch of excavating and there's a big trouble spot, even if it's, close to the end wall, consider putting a bag of concrete in or something like that just to kind of help strengthen that up a little bit. I don't think you're going to have to do this for everything. If you do, that's a whole nother conversation. But in its simplest form, if you push over trees, you can, on some of the roots, you can pound all the way through them and it's going to cut on its own. Or you may have to take it off the top, or you may have to do a little digging. Now that's all fine and good if you're perfectly level. But for most of us, we're going to have at least some type of slope. NRCS is going to grant you at least 5 degrees over 100 foot, which is pretty considerable. This is a 2-degree angle illustrated in this photo. The orange circle and the orange line is representing about halfway, so 24 inches in, 24 inches out on the ground post. Well, what do you do if this thing slopes? Well, on the left, if it slopes down, you can backfill and or you cannot drill the post in all the way and just have it a little bit sticking up further out of the ground than what you would at the far right, in which you're going to pound it in a little further to have that nice even line all the way across the top. We can still employ some of the things that we talked about a second ago, cutting off the top, pushing your way through the root, or digging out the obstruction. But just remember, you can take off some of the top that's in the very dark brown on the right and bring it down to level out your pad, or you can be okay with a little bit of a slope and adjust the post accordingly. Now back to Carl.
One more thing on the levelness inside the hoop house. You don't have to be so exact with that as well. You want to just make sure you got the water that's going to run off and go elsewhere so it doesn't run in. That's the biggest problem we had on our first one that we did, is we had water actually run in and then it's going to sit there. So if you can get the water to come off and not come in, don't worry so much about the inside as much, because if you're going to be doing raised beds, you're going to already have an extra 6-8 inches on that, or else you're going to be tilling. Whatever your process and methodology is, that ground is constantly going to be shifting, so you're going to be working it. And during that process, if you find low spots or if water's coming in, you can pivot and fix that at that time. So that ground is constantly going to be changing shape inside.